this application and the one to follow. So I'll,
In whichever order we make.
whichever
choose to.
order you take them in. Thank you.
Don't fall asleep. We'll need you in a minute.
Okay.
Okay, fantastic. Any preferred? No? All right, so 10th Street and East High Street it is.
Right next to each other. Good evening. This request is for an entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness to construct a medical office building at the northeast corner of East High Street and 10th Street Northeast. This is a 1.1 acre site that's owned by Martha Jefferson Hospital. Comp plan designation is mixed use, zone for downtown north corridor, and it is within the East High Street entrance corridor. There are currently on the site 2 single-story office buildings and a third building which will be demolished. Last year, a preliminary site plan and an entrance corridor application were submitted. The applicant deferred the EC application in order to address suggestions from staff. That primary suggestion being to add a pedestrian entrance at the East High Street facade, which the applicant has followed. The proposed new building is a 3-story medical office building with 2-story entrance fronting on High Street and a 2-story rear parking structure for 178 spaces. There's an entrance from the upper parking deck and from the lower parking deck. The parking structure will be accessed from 2 points: off High Street with a ramp to the upper parking level, and off of 10th Street with a ramp down to the lower parking level. The main building is a 3-story building, will be brick with brick and precast concrete accent bands. The cornice will be an aluminum composite panel with similar material above and below the punched windows. There's a rooftop appurtenance which will be clad with aluminum composite panels. The entrance on High Street is 2 stories, and the surround, as is the entrance surround off of the rear parking deck, the upper parking deck. And that will, both of those consist of stone veneer, precast concrete lintels, aluminum storefront and curtain walls with aluminum sunshades. At the northeast corner of the site, there's a large existing tree which will be preserved. And in fact, the building was designed specifically to provide space for this tree. Their landscaping along the frontage on High Street and along 10th Street proposes street trees of red maple and some shrubs. Signage is not shown and will require a separate submittal. There's a lighting plan that shows 4 pole lights at the upper parking deck and 8 wall lights on the building, 4 at the upper parking deck on the wall of the building, 2 at the west elevation of the building along the ramp to the upper parking deck, and 2 on the main building at the East High Street entrance. And in your discussion, staff recommends the following for your consideration, and I'll admit here that these first couple items I took directly from the staff report that Mary Joy had drafted. The height, mass, and scale of the proposed building is appropriate at this location. The large parking deck at the rear is unfortunate in terms of massing, but permitted. The building is well articulated. The parking deck is articulated as well as it can be. The mix of building materials is appropriate, however, material samples and specifications are needed. The design and arrangement of the building on the site is appropriate. Compared to existing buildings and structures fronting on East High Street, this site is prominent, and the proposed building scale and materials are appropriate for a corner building. The applicant has incorporated the staff's suggested changes, that is to make it more compatible with the corridor. You all may have additional recommendations, but that change again was the having a entrance on the High Street facade. The lighting plan does comply with dark sky requirements and height limits. The photometric analysis indicates that little to no lateral light transmission off the site. In reviewing the streets that work criteria, the applicant's plan indicates an appropriate sidewalk width along High Street and the planting of street trees and ornamental shrubs. However, relative to the proposed street trees, there are some questions about the species selected and their spacing from the building. The city forester provided comment during the preliminary site plan review last year. These issues will be evaluated and addressed when the revised site plan is submitted. In addition, staff recommends that the ERB include the following, that you review material samples and cut sheets, You require that all glass be specified as clear with a minimum 70% VLT. And while signage will require separate permits, require that all signage shall appear to be lit white at night, and require that any rooftop equipment will be screened within the appurtenance. Thank you.
Are there any questions for staff?
So we don't have any of the material samples here
The
to,
applicant is here. or
oh,
said
we're
they
going
would-
to have those later?
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
okay, okay, thanks.
Would the applicant? Oh, you have.
Let-
I'm sorry, Mr. Werner, could I ask you a question? Okay. So I'm looking through the standards for reviewing an entrance corridor, and I see that it talks about the structure as a whole. So we are not just looking at the building, the portion of the building that is facing High Street or just the corner, but we're also looking at the parking deck in the back too. That's part of our review, and that's part of our consideration. Is that correct?
well, and thank you all for raising that earlier. I read through the design guidelines, and in all honesty, you all are probably far more familiar with some of these things than I am. They're in the guidelines addressing frontage. There is discussion of maintaining and providing a strong sense of community through pedestrian vehicular links from a corridor site to nearby neighborhoods, and there's also a comment about use common streetscape elements, materials, and designs to visually link the corridor areas and adjacent neighborhoods. There's nothing specifically that says what is beyond your purview, and the tendency has been, is it visible from the corridor? I guess one would say this is, and I think because this area is included in the entrance corridor, certainly the appearance of that and how you view it would be appropriate to address it.
Yeah, I'm seeing the standard, one of our standards being we're to review the overall architectural design, form, and style of the building or structure, and exterior architectural details and features of the subject building. So I'm interpreting that to mean the deck and the building facing a High Street, as well as the back of the deck.
Right, and I believe that's where, as I said, I'll give Mary Joy credit. Her comments were, somewhat to the point about the parking deck. Unfortunate in terms of massing, but permitted. And
Why does she say "but permitted"?
I do not know. I did not have a conversation with her about that, but
Because a parking deck would be an allowable use as part of,
Okay, so
Part of
she's
this.
just talking about the use, not necessarily its design.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, not to speak for her, but that's how I interpreted it.
yeah.
You can have a parking deck, but you could comment on how the parking deck appears.
And there is an acknowledgement within, that this is, also an auto-oriented corridor. This is not, we want the pedestrian sense, but there's also a realization within the guidelines of, the vehicular nature of this corridor. So, but as far as you looking at the aesthetic, I think your conclusions are valid. If that helps,
Yes, thank you.
in my opinion.
Yeah,
Whoa, wait. Mr. Sandowski, do you have any questions?
I'll wait. You seem to be ready to go. So go ahead now.
It's not that, I just,
she didn't want him to
Hang
sit down
tight.
again.
I did.
I know you
Fine.
want to sit down.
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Well, I'm just kind of curious, like looking if the picture is representative of this. Is there any way to, can we soften that in any way? Can we, can there be, I don't know, maybe our tree master down on the end would have some ideas for, kind of, looking at it from the side of the street. Can you put trees on the parking deck or do something else? Just to kind of, that just looks like boy, oh boy, we're just gonna have that just beating down on that, and it doesn't soften it up in any way, shape, or form. A nice design around the front of the building and on the corner and everything else, and then you go around the back, and it's like, oh, this is interesting.
Sounds like a good question for the
The
applicant.
applicant,
Yes,
yes.
it does.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
And assuming that it's an office building, then it's just going to sit there for 12 hours a day.
Right.
It's an unoccupied parking lot.
Okay.
Even though this is an autocentric corridor, quote unquote,
Yeah.
this is still in the purview of the East High Street
Right.
Scape project.
I don't think one is exclusive of the other. I mean, it recognizes the multimodal,
I understand, but how does this, has this project, I mean, have you looked at that based off of some of the information going for the East High Street Scape project?
I have not.
Okay,
right, but we have had folks doing that.
okay.
Because of the timing of that versus this, there are comments in the site plan, the preliminary site plan currently that note the continued conversations and compatibility with that.
Okay, because this is the final stretch of that.
No doubt, and again, this was a, I'm not ducking the question, but this was the staff report was prepared with the intent of having that entrance relocated at the front. That was done, and I trusted my predecessor's conclusions, so certainly you can reevaluate this, but that's where I.
So the entrance, just so I'm clarifying, the entrance to the lower level of that parking deck is from East
From-
High Street?
No, the East High Street goes to the upper level of the
Oh,
deck,
okay,
and then around the side from 10th Street going down is a ramp into that lower parking lot.
Okay, I had it confused, so sorry.
It's a lot of similar drawings in there that you flip through, but yes.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions of staff? Okay, now, if the applicant would like to come up, is it still 10 minutes? You have we'll set the timer, we have 10 minutes. You okay?
I'm good.
Okay.
My name is Scott Collins. Thank you for having us tonight. I'm just one aspect of this tonight. We have a team here, mainly of architects, because I think that's there's a lot to talk about, a lot of good things to talk about the building. They've worked really hard on that. I'm just going to hit a couple of things on the site, a couple questions that you guys just brought up, and a couple things on the site, and then I'll kind of turn it over and get into the architecture aspect of everything. As far as the streets as work improvements along East High Street and 10th Street, there was a fair amount of right-of-way that's been dedicated along this site, about 4 or 5 feet, up to 4 or 5 feet along East High Street and 10th Street for those improvements. I know they're still working on that, and we've been working with staff about how much room they would need in order to make those improvements on the streets, on the streetscape that they're trying to incorporate with their designs. And so we've been working with them, and I think we've got a right-of-way that works for them that they would that they've asked for to incorporate that. So we made sure our buildings works with that and our site development. So a lot of work went into that, and I think we have a project that doesn't prohibit those future plans, the streetscape improvements from being done. A lot of work was also done, as Jeff pointed out, about to save that tree at the corner. I think that's a good aspect of the whole overall project, and we wanted to definitely keep that. This site does have a train to it, which made it kind of cool as far as the way we set up the parking. This is a downtown north corridor, so 50% of the parking spaces have to be covered from the sky. That's the ordinance. This site didn't really lend to having parking underneath a building, so we worked at another option as far as incorporating sort of like a podium parking aspect to it. So that parking deck is pretty well buried two sides or 2.5 sides of the site, obviously next to the building, and from the east side, closer to downtown, that parking deck is in the ground. When you're on East High Street, you do enter to the upper parking deck. All you see is sort of a upper level parking area down that road. That's all at grade. And then you come in from 10th Street at the lower level. And knowing that that portion of the parking deck is the only part that you really see, we did try to create the buffer along that planted area between the parking deck and the right-of-way and the sidewalk, per city guidelines as far as buffering. But we can definitely make some changes or increase some landscaping throughout the preliminary and the final site plan if you want to see more screening as far as that aspect of it. If you're worried about that side, but that's really one of the only sides you really see of the whole parking deck. Those are the main couple things I wanted to talk about from a site design, and I was going to let the architects kind of go in and talk about the building and how that relates with all the other buildings around.
Hello, I'm Mark Dignard with Innovate Architecture and Interiors. A little nervous to say that after all the discussion of the word innovative. Appreciate being here
Here you go,
tonight.
Lisa, pay attention.
I'm listening. I am all
Can
ears.
help with the definition. Ultimately, this building kind of embodies it, a tough site, very acute angle on a corner with sloping streets that surround it. And the idea is, how do we put a building there and the parking for that building in such a way that adds to, as opposed to takes away from, the community and the entrance corridor. So what we tried to do is to place a building in such a way that it's not a big block that's on that street corner, that we break down the scales, that we use different materials, different glazing options, larger windows, smaller windows, stone, brick, along High Street. We used a 2-story element as opposed to having a 3-story wall facing High Street. So we tried to break the building down, and as you can see in the images, in such a way to, sort of add to that area. Across the street is the CFA Institute, which has some of the similar elements that we've sort of brought into our composition to sort of help blend it with the immediate adjacent buildings. With the parking, the thing that I think works really good about it is that from a vehicular standpoint or pedestrian standpoint, we've kind of hidden the cars. Along High Street, as Scott was saying, you get a glimpse to the entrance road or entrance drive along the side of the building to get back to the parking, but you really can't see the parking very well. And then as you drop down and turn onto 10th, you're looking at the brick wall, which is articulated, which has banding and planting and some buffering, but you really can't see the cars on the top very well because, of course, there's a wall, so we don't drive off the parking deck. So that sort of hides the cars from your view in that direction. So I think in general, what we've tried to do is come up with a composition that even on the rear facade, as you look at it coming up 10th, it might look across the parking deck and seeing the back of the building. There's still articulation, there's stone elements, there's a variation in the windows and the corners, punched windows and larger windows. So we've tried to really think about how the building looks from all angles. I did bring a material sample board. So basically, some very basic materials. Brick, we try to select a color that seems to fit in with the area, kind of a red brick with a little bit of flash to it, to give it a little more traditional look. A engineered stone, which allows us to play with the variations in size of the stone to give some interest and relief to the stone wall. The ability to have some small rock face elements as well, which add nice shadow and relief. And then we've used some metal panels as well, 3 different colors. The metal panels actually are bent and interpreted into more traditional elements like cornices and infill panels, where you might normally use a precast. Between windows, we use a precast color metal panel. At the CFA Institute, they use a lot of these aluminum, silver metal panels. And so we've kind of gotten away from that a little bit. with ours and try to use more of a traditional precast color panel, which I think is a little more appropriate. The clear glass is not here because
Excuse
it's
me,
clear.
you think it's a little more what?
Appropriate.
Oh, thank you.
For our building and our composition, what we're trying to achieve. As I said, the clear glass is not here because it's clear. So.
That's innovative.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be here all week.
It's invisible.
Me too.
The parking deck, the upper level of the parking deck, there is no plantings proposed for that. Is that correct?
So in the renderings, what we're actually showing is the renderings are focused on the building itself. And so what happens in the rendering is that because we've left the parking deck as a white slate with parking lines on it, it doesn't really represent what it would actually look like, because it's not going to be all white. It's going to be colored. It's going to have it's a concrete deck, and the intent would be to add some accessories to help soften the entry. So, for example, you can put plantings in large pots, things like that, that would act as sort of landscaping for an otherwise concrete slab. We've done this successfully on some other projects. You can get these really large 4-foot dishes, concrete dishes, and then you can landscape those and put seasonal color in them, and to sort of brighten up the entrances.
I was looking at the pictures that we had,
Yes, sir.
and of course you have, the plain parking lot, but there was one that you show that actually has like, what looks like trees coming up out of the parking lot, which softens that view going down East High Street.
Yep.
But you're not proposing to put anything like that in there to kind of soften that view going down High Street.
So what you're seeing right now is a photo compilation of a digital SketchUp model imposed on the site, because we wanted you guys to not only see these kinds of pictures, but to see sort of what the building would look like in context. So those are actual trees that exist that are beyond the building.
Okay.
But this is the view that you would actually see. So as you're driving along and you're looking up, you're seeing trees that surround the parking lot, beyond and behind it. So it's not like you're going to see nothing.
That's beyond the parking
Right.
lot. Okay.
But it will be part of your visual, scope.
Okay. Well, that answers that.
Your time is up, John. No, just kidding. Any questions, any more questions for the applicant?
When you reviewed the provisions of the entrance corridor design guidelines, could you tell us sort of what guided you in coming up with this design? And in particular, I'm addressing human scale in buildings and spaces and creating a sense of place and an inviting public realm, if you could address those a little bit.
Absolutely. A lot of it is brought together by the site, the shape of the site, the surrounding buildings, and the requirements that the buildings be up on the street. There are maximum setbacks associated with this site, which pulls the building to the street. So our thought was, let's do something to break down the face of this building as it approaches the pedestrian scale. So for example, it would have been allowable for us to bring all the way up to that minimum setback, a 3-story building with a 3-story wall that would extend quite high above a pedestrian walking by. So what we did was we broke down the building. So along High Street, as you can see, there's a 2-story element. Within that 2-story element, rather than just putting a brick wall with punched windows, we created more archways so you can see larger glass elements. To further break it down, we then added some sunshades at that lower level, at that 1-story level. So if I'm walking along, I'm seeing a sunshade which sort of acts like a canopy that you might see on a store or something like that. So all along, we're trying to break down from the top of the building all the way down to the pedestrian scale as you walk along the street. And then, of course, as we added the entrance on the corner, which was part of the staff comments, we actually brought another canopy out there to lower, again, down that edge, so you have that sort of cornice line that's above the first floor entrance there.
Now tell me about the pedestrian experience walking along the parking deck on 10th Street.
So as you're walking along the parking deck, you're walking along planting on your right and a low brick wall that's on, on your right. And the idea is instead of walking along a sea of grade parking, I'm not seeing cars. I'm actually seeing wonderful landscaping, a brick wall, like I might be walking along the side of a building, as opposed to walking along the side of a parking lot. So if we had made this a 1.5 or 2-story building, we could have parked that whole lot back there. And if someone is walking along, they're gonna just see the cars.
Well, we wouldn't have a building that was unarticulated or didn't provide any engagement to the pedestrian that large. It's the same footprint as that parking deck.
Absolutely. Well, to answer your question, I think that's what you'll see, what's proposed. The idea is that if you look at the one here, we try to add banding, brick articulation, as much as possible to shield the parking and provide something that is pleasant to look at, as opposed to, again, a flat, unarticulated wall.
But what makes the pedestrian feel safe?
Well, I think the question is, what brings the safety into concern? What about,
Well, I mean, there's an entire, crime prevention through environmental design is an entire, so what makes a pedestrian walking along that, and I was trying to get a dimension here, but I can't, feel safe just walking along a brick wall?
well, I think the idea is to make sure there's the appropriate lighting. I think lighting, number one, makes you feel safe. Because if you're, sort of in a darker area, or there's sort of obstructed areas that someone can hide behind or something like that, I think that's usually what cues you to your safety, being in an area that you're familiar with. So I think that this, the building in general, being articulated the way that it is, providing appropriate lighting, providing the lush landscaping, is doing everything that we can do as architects to address the parking that's adjacent to it. I hope that answers your question.
Did you have a landscape architect on this project?
Well, Scott Collins is going to be working on that if you'd like to ask him some questions.
I just wondered if you had a landscape architect on the project.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Wait,
I
Mr.
just have one question.
Sure.
I understand the canopy on the entrance on High Street. Why do you need sunshades on a north-facing elevation?
Because the element isn't there as much to provide the sun shading as it is to break down the scale and to bring an element sort of lower on the building, providing some shadow, some relief, some articulation to the building at the pedestrian scale.
Tom,
a great question.
Going back to some safety, is what kind of lighting is going down 10th Street, I guess, where the parking deck is? Is there lighting on the deck itself?
Yeah, well, let me let Scott address the lighting. He's been working on that.
Yes, there's lighting above, but there's also lighting below in the deck. So you'll have certainly a little bit of spillover coming out of the parking deck below, and that's going to backlight basically all the landscaping right there. So it's going to be very difficult to sit there and try to hide or something like that behind that landscaping when you're backlit coming out. You're going to be able to see a lot more
Okay,
that
good.
aspect.
Thank you.
There's a lot of landscaping there. You're gonna backlight through all that landscaping?
I'm sorry to get you up again. The height of the wall there at the corner of the rear of the lot and 10th Street, can you give me an estimate of what that height is?
Okay, it's a great question. Some of the final grading and all of that is going to sort of determine that, but the idea is there, we're breaking it down to probably around 10 feet.
So even though it's mostly the upper deck, that the below deck is mostly below grade at that point, there's still 10 foot of wall height?
It's probably going to be somewhere there. It's going to be tapering as you go.
Right.
There's going to be some amount of that wall that extends above the parking level, of course, so people don't, fall off or cars don't drive off. So there's some amount of parking that'll be, a wall that'll be above that, and that'll also act to shield the parking, the view of the cars. But we can, certainly work to minimize that as we finalize all of the grades and landscaping, if that's something that you would like for us to.
When you were looking for something to hang your design on to be compatible, did you look at all to the, not to mimic it in any way, but did you look for inspiration to the older part of the former Martha Jefferson Hospital rather than the CFA portion that's more recent? Because I think if you look at the older portion at the intersection of Locust and High, you see much more human scale. And the building that you are proposing for this is really looking less like a medical office building and more like a mini hospital. And I think that's, along with the deck, that's one of the things that's just making it less human scale and less approachable.
I think
It's just making this, which has always, kind of been I mean, even if it's a little run down and dated in some people's minds, it's an area where you feel comfortable walking, and what you've designed just doesn't feel at all comfortable. It doesn't look like Charlottesville. And I'm searching for the right politic architectural language, but it just doesn't fit that corner very well. And then you add the parking deck to it, and it's just an insult. And I don't mean to insult you, but it just doesn't fit this site.
So your question.
Well, my
What-
question
so back to the
is.
did I look at the old
Yeah,
Martha-
my
okay.
question is, did you look to the old hospital
Okay.
for some degree of human scale and a takeoff point for your design?
We tried to take a look at all of that. We looked at both things that were sort of micro to the site, and directly around the site, and we tried to look at sort of the buildings in the area and the general flavor of the buildings in the area. If you look at a typical medical office building, they're very square and rectilinear in nature. They're very straight with the walls. The reason is because medical design, tenant design, really wants you to have a nice rectilinear space to be able to lay out space. Also, as you develop a project, you want to develop every square foot you can. You would like to have, the best kind of building is, 3-story rectangles stacked on top of each other. I think the development team here has a real interest in providing a building that they can be proud of, that you can be proud of, and to that end, allowed us to reduce the amount of square footage we were building on the site to be able to provide more human scale, more articulation, more breakdown of the facades, as opposed to what a typical medical office building would look like. However, there is an interest for this building to look like a state-of-the-art healthcare building, because as people are coming to the building, they want to feel like they're going to get the best of care. And that's important for the client who's making the investment in the site. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
No,
but-
well, it looks like a hospital.
Can I add one other thing to that? When you talk about the old hospital as well, it is sort of tough to sort of compare that to buildings nowadays with the new regulations, because look at where that building was placed on the site. It's set back. It's got landscaping in front. It's got 25, 30 feet between the road and the hospital from all sides. That's not what's allowed anymore by the ordinances. It's bringing these buildings up
Yeah.
front.
Yeah, maybe that's where we made a mistake.
Maybe.
Yeah. And that's, yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, it's
that's on us, not on
right.
you.
So I think they looked, definitely took that into account. But you're right. Going by the old hospital, it's beautiful, absolutely. But the ordinance nowadays doesn't allow that. So it doesn't give you the option to push back, because you have 0 to 10 to 20 minimum maximum, and 0 to 10 max, and that's we're set with that.
Any more questions? comments, motions?
I would note that I spent a lot of time in the buildings that are being demolished, as both my ENT and my dermatologist were in there when I was a kid. So this is a personal loss, independent of the design of the proposed building.
I also didn't realize there was 3 buildings being demolished instead of just the front two.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the happiest moments of my life
No.
were spent in that area, but there is a certain sense of intimacy and familiarity that is very much lost in the new iteration. This person who lives downtown and walks in that area from time to time, it just doesn't seem approachable and walkable, and if our ordinance and guidelines don't promote that, then that's a problem for us, and we really need to revisit them.
That's the maximum setback, you know, that sort of
Yeah.
issue on the street.
And the wall is just, I mean,
Yeah, I've been trying
to be a pedestrian in that area, and we're trying to promote walkability, and I don't know who our rep is on the East High Street project.
Me.
You, okay. So I haven't looked at those designs, so maybe you could talk to
We haven't
that.
gotten the design really yet. I mean, we had a meeting and they went forth with some public comment on the day of like 47 other things, so I haven't gotten that. Now they're just looking for surveys, and we're waiting for the next meeting to come forth.
Yeah. I mean, this is such a walkable area where people are
It's very walkable.
walking to and from work and to and from downtown.
And that corridor on 10th Street is walkable. There's a daycare. I mean, there's lots of things through there where, and
I was starting to feel, when I realized that it was, that the lower parking was mostly underground, I was starting to feel, well, this would be sort of like walking next to a graveyard wall or something. You know, that wasn't so bad, but then told it's 10 foot tall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the grade does change as you go across because the street changes in grade.
Yeah, I see
down.
that, but I asked you what the elevation or the height of the wall was at that corner, which is the
Yeah.
shortest part of the wall.
And perhaps-
hang on one second. If you're going to respond, I need you to come back up so she can get that.
Perhaps Scott can
Thank
address
you.
that as far as what the grades can do to minimize that wall. I apologize.
That's okay. I just want to make sure she can capture everything.
Yeah, from the back end, there's about a 4-foot difference between 10th Street and the parking deck.
The deck itself.
It's the deck itself there, so then you have a 3-foot wall, so about 7 feet at that spot right there,
Okay.
which would be broken up because obviously you'll have an open area down below that's still letting some air and light in and out of the other building, the other parking deck and lower.
So the highest point, 7 feet.
Highest point 7 feet at that point.
At the shortest
At the shortest
place.
Yeah.
So are only the 2 medical buildings coming down, or is the
The house is coming down too.
The house is coming out.
house is
The
coming
house
down?
that the architects are in, behind it's also coming down.
Behind,
Yeah.
but not the house on High Street? You're taking down the 2 medical buildings on High Street
Right.
and the house that's behind?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, yes, okay.
That's right.
All right. Boy. Didn't you want to build some apartments back there and have structured parking and do away with this big parking lot?
Yeah, talk about mixed use.
I mean, we need housing, we need mixed use. I mean, one of the worst things about downtown now is the parking deck at the other
I
medical
know,
building
I
on
know,
East Jefferson Street, and to add this one, we would just become a wasteland.
Housing would look nice on top of that, wouldn't it? Oh. Okay. Questions, comments,
I'd rather have a
motion?
Centel building here.
Questions, comments? Okay, that was a comment.
It was, I'm sorry.
I hear you. Questions, comments, motions? We have a motion? I'll just make a comment. I don't know that I could approve this. I think it goes against every single thing that we've been talking about into the design of what we're doing in this area. It is just everything we're trying to go away from. And how that relates to the entrance corridor would be. Okay.
So can we articulate the concerns?
Yeah, I was looking at this motion and
I am too.
I couldn't articulate the concerns all on my own.
The one on the backside is a motion too.
So the concern I have is the pedestrian experience along 10th Street. And how to mitigate the very plain wall and, well, for the pedestrian experience. And making the High Street experience more personal, more pedestrian orient, more human scaled. And then the parking deck itself, how to enliven that, to make it humane. I guess those are my particular concerns.
I think it goes against the facilitate pedestrian access with, I don't think it encourages compact walkable development and human scale.
Yeah, maintain human scale in buildings and spaces.
Right.
Consider the building scale, especially height, mass, complexity of form and details, and the impact of spaces created.
Yeah, it just,
Encourage compact, walkable developments. Design pedestrian connections from sidewalk and car to buildings, between buildings and between corridor properties. Create a sense of place.
Right.
yeah.
Does it, you historic folks, does it encourage a new contemporary design that integrates well with existing historic buildings and enhancing the character?
Marginally.
I mean, there's an argument to be made that the choice of materials is a sympathetic choice to the context of the neighborhood. So I mean, and that using those materials in a contemporary fashion creates a modern building that relates to the context, especially given the context of this particular intersection. Although the looking, I guess, for conversation's sake, west to the freestanding houses, how that relationship works isn't completely clear in these materials. But for the larger scale of the intersection, the materials palette certainly seems plausible. I think the fenestration perhaps needs to be rationalized a little to make sense. It's I don't think placed as harmoniously on the facades as it could be. The mix of metal spandrels and punched openings and things. I understand what the aspiration was, but I'm not sure that the aspiration was fully realized in the way the windows are disposed across the facade.
Yeah, my objection is not with the materials so much as the scale of what's being created with them.
And the only reason there's stone at that intersection now is because the Wells Fargo Bank, I think, is not subject to entrance corridor review. And, you know, that's, who knows how long that will be there. So I wouldn't encourage you to try to be necessarily compatible with it.
But there's stone ornament even on the original Martha Jefferson
Yeah, some,
building.
but
So, I mean, it's not completely alien to
it's not
the-
completely alien, but it maybe is not the best design precedent to use that.
I forgot about the stone on that Wells Fargo.
Just make a motion.
Yep. Somebody make a motion. We're just sitting here hoping it
Yeah.
changes and it's not going to.
It's not going to change.
All right, I'll make a shot at it. Wait a minute, I gotta find it. Defer or deny, though?
That's up to you. You're making the motion.
I don't see how we can defer it, because I don't think there's enough here that is resonating with us that it's a case of making a few modifications and they bring it back. I mean, to me, that's what I struggled with when I looked at, you know, with the following concerns. I just sort of feel like they need to start over.
So I move to deny the entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness application for the new medical office building and parking deck at 916 and 920 East High Street and 325 10th Street Northeast until the following concerns are addressed. The pedestrian experience and human scale of the building as it faces High Street, the pedestrian experience and scale of the building wall along 10th Street, and the lack of vegetation, of human-scaled elements on the parking deck.
And I think what Brian said about the fenestration,
Rationalizing the fenestration and making it more human scale, Brian? Is that a fair?
I think maybe the scale of the fenestration's okay, but rationalizing it, I think maybe at the base, thinking about how to modulate I'm not sure the brise soleils are sufficient to impart a sense of human scale. So maybe revisiting the size of the openings at the base of the building and seeing how those can be articulated in a way that gives a gentler sense of scale.
Good.
Yeah.
What he said.
yes, a gentler sense of scale.
So do
is
you
what-
have a motion? I mean, is that, and did you mention the pedestrian access, encouraging compact walkable development? Did you mention that in your motion?
Well, I just mentioned the pedestrian experience
Okay.
along 10th and High Street.
Okay. Do you have a motion that you want me to read that back before someone seconds it? Or do you have it?
Good luck.
Well, I have these themes. A motion for denial with the following concerns that would need to be addressed in order to come back. The pedestrian experience on both High and 10th Street, lack of vegetation on the parking deck, rationalization of the fenestration and links to human scale, a gentler sense of scale. Not sure how to articulate that, but you guys are architects, so I'm sure that the architects can figure that out.
So we have a motion
I will second the motion.
and a second. Any further discussion? Ms. Creasy, will you call roll?
Sure. Mr. Lahindra?
Aye.
Ms. Keller?
Aye.
Mr. Santowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kiesecker? Oh, he's not here. And Ms.
Who's
Green?
recused?
He's
He's recused.
Aye. So, the motion for denial passes. Thank you. Yes, we have got one more entrance corridor before we gavel out and go to something else. Okay. Our next item for the entrance corridor is the Ready Kids.
Good evening again. I continue to tell people every day is an interesting learning experience here, and just to comment on quickly on a few of the things that you all raised. You all have the purview to review and revise the design guidelines. It's yours to develop and recommend design guidelines to council. So if there's some things we need to look at, we certainly can at your insistence. And I also want to say, speaking with the media earlier, I mentioned Martha Jefferson Hospital, and the young woman didn't know what that was, and I then said CFA. Oh, and so yeah, at that building, my son was born there. Yours probably were. So it is a loss. The one here now is this is a request for the Ready Kids building. It's a request for an entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness to renovate an existing two-story masonry office building at the northeast corner of East High Street and 11th Street Northeast. It's a 0.6 of an acre site. It's owned by Children, Youth, and Family Services. The building is used for their Ready Kids program. The site's comp plan designation is mixed use. It's zoned High Street corridor, and it is within the East High Street entrance corridor. And currently the building, as I said, is being used by Ready Kids to provide youth counseling services. The proposed renovations include the partial demolition of portions of the existing building and the construction of a two-story addition at each end. The existing building was built in 1964, has a low linear design that reflects the style of that period. There's a flat overhanging roof, and there are two truncated mansard features on the roof. The exterior walls are red brick, and there's cream-colored square concrete blocks infill. At the west end of the building, the existing building, there's a drive-through that has an entrance off of East High Street. The existing building has punched single light sliding windows and storefront entry doors. And with the renovation, the exterior walls, roof, and windows will remain. The concrete block wall sections and the cornice will be painted in a gray tone more complementary to the brick. To construct the two-story west addition, the existing drive-through will be demolished, the grade changed, and the sidewalk repaired. To address the setback issue at the east side, constructing the two-story east addition will require removing and renovating the southeast corner of the existing building, and as a result, that new eastern facade will align with 11th Street. Trees and planting not impacted by construction will be protected. All of the mature trees along High Street are to remain, and new will be added along 11th Street. New landscaping is proposed at areas of disturbance. A rain garden will be constructed near the rear entry, and parking will remain at the rear of the site. No new signage is proposed. The exterior lighting, the existing will remain at the north and south elevations of the existing building and also at the parking area behind it. New wall sconces will be installed at the new east and west exits. And at the entrance from the parking lot into the building, the stairs and the ramp will have wall-mounted lighting. Bollard lights will be installed at the walkway. In your discussion, staff recommends the following for your consideration. Conclusion that the height, mass, and scale of the proposed building is appropriate in this location, that the proposed architectural details and features are appropriate, The design and arrangement of the building on the site is appropriate. And compared to other buildings and structures within this entrance corridor, this site is comparable to many existing commercial buildings and uses. And this is an auto-oriented use appropriately located on East High Street. At the same time, the removal of the drive-through and the driveway, the sidewalk repair, and the retention of existing street trees will also improve the pedestrian experience. The proposed renovations and additions to this existing building are appropriate within the context of this segment of the High Street entrance corridor, and staff recommends approval of the certificate of appropriateness as submitted. Thank you. Any questions?
Questions? Would you like to hear from the applicant?
I don't think it's necessary, actually.
Well, I think we should give them an opportunity since they
Yeah.
had to sit and listen.
Yeah, that's
We
true.
brought them back.
That's true, yes. Let's hear
Come
from
on
them.
up.
And because I.
So it's not a waste of time, I know.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I did pull it because
You-
I thought it should see the light of day because I thought it was a good project.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me stretch my legs. I'm David Timmerman. I'm representing Ready Kids organization. If you don't know anything about the organization, they're actually a number of different departments under one roof. They deal with teen counseling, different kinds of social work, smaller children outreach, school outreach. A really strong part of the community, and so we're happy to have been working with them. And at this point, I could go on, or if you want to just ask me questions, I'm happy to answer.
Could you tell us something about the design development? What were you looking
Yeah.
for, and what did you ask of the architects, and how you felt the architects have responded to your needs, and why do you think this is an appropriate design, an acceptable design for you?
Well, I am the architect.
Well, you should know then.
So yeah, I can tell you firsthand. So, when they came to us, they were looking for maximizing the lot. Basically turns into about 5,000 square feet extra that they can add onto their 8,000 square foot building. And they had multiple needs. They had needs for more youth counseling. They needed a waiting room twice the size of what they have now. And every department was kind of busting at the seams. So at first glance, we thought this would be a one-sided addition onto their building. We were immediately struck with the fact that the east end was out of compliance, which raised numerous challenges, given that they want to proceed into construction in November. So we wanted to help them move forward as quickly as possible. As a nonprofit, they didn't have a lot of wiggle room to deal with legal fees and such. So we started looking at the idea of actually, this what we thought originally was a pretty crazy idea of cutting the 10-foot corner off of that building to bring the building into compliance. There was what we did was we told them, first and foremost, before we do anything, let's listen to you and hear what your needs are and design accordingly. And their biggest request was we need adjacencies. Everything that we do is interrelated. So we started thinking about going from that 3-story one-sided addition to the 2-story two-sided addition. And serendipity struck. They loved it, and from a design standpoint, we really loved the idea of transforming what was a dated building into something new and something that we feel like enhances the corridor, and something that reflects the kind of flexibility that is inherent in what they do, and the openness that's inherent in what they do. as well as a connection to the outside and its surroundings. So, hope that answers your question.
And how did you address the human scale along the along the streetscapes?
We felt like the building as it sits is in pretty good scale in relation to the surrounding structures. Just by way of the limitations on the site, we didn't have a lot of room to work with. The additions, we feel, as if they're relatively condensed. It doesn't make a huge impact on the site. As Jeff mentioned, we're keeping most of the existing trees, and Ready Kids made special mention at the very beginning that they wanted to keep the big ginkgo tree that's in the playground, and even further draw a connection between it and the new waiting room, which is located in that larger space on the west side. We tried to keep within the scale of the original building, but we felt like there was a lot that needed to be done to the original building to give it some more variation, some more interest. We can't wait to chop the strange 1960s parapets off. And then there's, the fact that the West Addition is taking the place of a drive-in, which is relatively unsafe. When you come in, it's a quick upgrade, steep upgrade, and then there's traffic that happens and cuts up the sidewalk at that point. So now our main entry to the parking lot is located around the corner on 11th Street, and the parking actually is working better now because of the new entry is an established entry. It's not just this drive-through that worked great for a doctor's office when the building was built in the 1960s, but didn't really match what they did now. So now the approach is you come up, there's a much more pedestrian-friendly entry. We're going to have the rain garden there as a part of the site plan requirements. We're thinking that rain garden would be a demonstrating place for the children, and there's a safer approach to the building.
And can you enter the building from the High Street side?
No.
So you enter the building only from the parking deck, the back of the building?
Yeah. Down on 11th Street, yeah.
There's an entrance on
yeah.
11th Street as well.
That's a private. The issue with the way their organization runs is that public and private, for a number of reasons, but for safety reasons, needs to remain separate. So when people come into the waiting room, there needs to be a true separation between the public and private. There are a lot of different families coming in and out. They need to have control over the people that they're servicing, and so the one entry is it really works best for the way their organization runs. And then in the downstairs portion, underneath that waiting room, they do have a larger trading room, which doubles the size of their current trading room, and it has we've put in an additional doorway down to that space for situations like Saturday classes when the rest of the building needs to be locked, and they wanted.
This door?
That's the door out from that space into.
But that's on High Street, right?
That's on High Street, and that actually accesses a private patio terrace, and that's mainly for workers. So that isn't accessible to the public walking along High Street. The main entrance to the downstairs is right next to the entry to the waiting room.
Any more questions?
So there's no entrance on the northwest, which is the High Street.
Correct.
And where it
The west-
and
the-
where it faces Locust, where's the Locust elevation? That would be the east elevation, would be what's
Yes.
facing the old hospital on Locust Avenue, right?
The east is basically adjacent to 11th Street. That's what we're calling the east
Okay,
elevation, and then
so
the
which is,
north.
which is the Locust Avenue facing elevation?
It'd be this east
It's the,
elevation.
I'm not exactly sure where Locust. Oh, are you referring to this portion?
I'm trying to identify which of these elevations is the one that's facing
It's the northwest
Locust.
corner.
It's the northwest.
West corner.
I just wanted to look at that one again. Yeah. That really was my only concern, where I think it's an appealing elevation, and you've explained now about the entrance, but it does seem odd to me that there isn't some entrance on what many people would perceive to be its main elevation.
Right.
So if we go back to those issues of pedestrians and walking down the street, but I mean, it makes sense from your program that you wouldn't want people to enter there. And because the building has been so vehicular oriented in the past, it really didn't have that much of a presence on Locust to begin with, because the Porte Cochere was really its entrance.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. I'm just now figuring out where Locust.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and then also keep in mind that the adjacent to that front is the playground, which is also semi-private to the site. So we don't want people going from High Street into the playground. We want somewhat of a controlled access into the playground, and that now happens through the waiting room and then through the right next to the main entry on the south side of the building, where the parking is located.
But pedestrians along High Street, would they know of the activity, the playground activity, and the employees that are having the break, the outside break area?
Yeah, there's a-
all that's visible, all that's engaging.
There's definitely a visual connection. I imagine they'll actually keep the gate or the fence that's there now, which is somewhat, it's a homegrown, multicolored picket fence.
I've seen that.
Yeah. So I hope they keep it, I think
Oh,
it's,
I do too.
yeah. And, the only thing that they would have to do is connect it to the new building. I think currently it connects to the Porte Cochere.
Yeah.
That's right, it does.
I'm not, in my mind, as long as, I want a pedestrian experience along High Street to be engaged with the building and the activities going on in the building.
Right.
And whether or not we provide a front door to the building on High Street, that's not the only way to engage the public. There's other ways too.
Well, there's an interesting combination of accessibility and transparency to their organization and to this building, as well as a certain serious regard to protection and defense. And that actually is expressed in around the elevation in the different spaces. For instance, this space, which is more of their admin conference room, has a bit more transparency than this room, which on the corner
Right.
is a teen counseling room. So that in that particular case, you see the clear stories up above.
That's the other one, isn't it?
And do you want to use mine?
Yeah, I didn't make
So
any,
if-
I wasn't expecting to go into this so I can make all the
How
prints.
is, so back to the northwest elevation, how is the property going to meet the sidewalk on Locust?
So it's.
I don't think we have any sort of depiction of that,
Yeah, it basically is gonna remain the same, except for where the.
because
they-
now there's a kind of overgrown hedge, I think, if I get back to that
Yeah,
photo,
except for where the driveway is.
except where the driveway is. So will you have some delineation then at that place?
Yeah, essentially, we're putting in the outdoor terrace that services the break room and the training rooms down below, the waiting room in that west addition. That outdoor patio space is gonna be located directly where the existing drive is. It's gonna be
Okay.
and its far north wall is gonna be approximately 5 to 7 feet away from the sidewalk. And the ground will slope down there to a knee wall, and
About how high?
I'd
that's
say
this
about
area he's talking
3
about.
or 4 feet, as low as we can get it with adequate
Just a
slope.
playground.
And I have a site plan if you
Yeah.
wanna.
Yeah, I could
And then-
probably go to that. I just was interested in where the hedge is now, what your treatment is there, because I'm concerned about, again, Locust is a very heavily traveled
Yeah,
street
yeah,
by pedestrians.
yeah.
And if there's no entrance, and I can agree with you that not having the vehicular entrance there will be better and safer.
Mm-hmm.
But it does pierce and invite you into the site.
Mhm.
And so if there isn't going to be that, what is there to make the pedestrian feel somewhat comfortable about this building that's set back?
Mhm.
Where the hedge is kind of a familiar element, even if it's scruffy. So I just was wondering, what are you replacing the hedge with there?
I think I'm no landscape architect, but what I would propose is extending it along in front of that, what's really gonna be more of a private outdoor space than a public space. It's more for the benefit of the staff, than it is, really for anyone else, and,
But you're not walling it off in a way
we're not walling it
that-
off,
that-
no, I mean, we wanna
Okay.
the idea is that we wanna bring light in, and, we want, visual connection, but at the same time, I think, we want, when a staff member goes out for lunch, or if they need a break, and it's actually an amenity that they're all really excited about, and they didn't think that they were gonna be able to accomplish it, but just given the sort of the double nature and the way we spread out the plan, we could fit it in. And the director's a little bit worried that now that it's on the plan, if it ever gets V'd out, that she'd never hear the end of it.
Okay, thank you.
But that does bring that closer to the street.
And here's the
Yeah.
Yes.
planting plan.
All
right, so
Well,
you-
we got the hedge.
You have the
Yeah.
building that's set back with this new addition is brought to the street.
Mhm.
And then you get the windows
Mhm.
on the
The
east.
transparency,
Ton of
the,
windows on
Yeah.
the east side now.
the employees out there, the playground.
Yeah.
Okay.
The front of the building comes out basically beyond the front face, the front of the new addition, which is here, comes out about 5 feet from the existing front face of the building. So just, and we needed to do that to sort of give it the prominence and have the existing dated building recede from a stylistic standpoint.
Any more questions? Mr. Stankowski, any questions?
No, I'm good.
Yeah.
You guys did all the hard work.
I would be comfortable making a motion to.
Fantastic.
We don't have a motion because it was on the consent agenda. I move, we do?
Thank you.
I move to approve the entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness application for this project for, what's the address on?
1,000 East.
1,000 East High Street.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I just think it's a really successful adaptation of, and I hate to use the term a dated building because I don't usually want to look at buildings as being dated, but I think this one probably is, and I think you've done a very good job, and it has a fresh approach, and you're meeting the particular requirements of a complex program, and I look forward to seeing it, and that was one of the reasons I pulled it from the consent agenda, because I thought it was a good example of how you could adapt an older building in a historic context. So thank you for doing a very thoughtful job.
Would you dare say innovative?
I was going to
I
say.
think innovative.
Yes,
Yes,
innovative.
that is the word.
This is
I'm having a hard
innovative.
time with the right words tonight.
This is it. Thank you for
Yes,
coming in.
Yes, thank you.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Creasy, would you please call roll?
Mr. Lahindra,
Aye.
Ms. Keller,
Aye.
Mr. Santosky,
Aye.
and Ms. Green.
Aye. Motion passes. I just threw away my agenda. Maybe I'm done for the evening. I'm going to gavel us out of the entrance corridor and back into the Planning Commission and ask Mr. Kieseeker if he would like to rejoin us.
She's gone home.
Yeah. He's just had enough.
He's right there.
He's probably talking to his buddies from work.
Yeah.
You got quorum, you can keep moving if you want.
I don't have my agenda. I threw it away. Wait.
What did you hand, no, that wasn't what you handed me.
Next on the agenda is a preliminary discussion for 167 Chancellor Street. Thank you. Can we get a staff report, please? Can y'all remind me, if you don't mind, before we start this, what is, this is a preliminary discussion. We'll have a staff report and a presentation by,
The applicant.
and then we'll just have questions
discuss,
and
yep.
discuss. There's no motion or anything.
No motion.
And then, so at some point, somebody's going to say, okay, the end, because we're having trouble with that this evening. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is a preliminary discussion for the proposed addition to an existing fraternity house located at property address 167 Chancellor Street. The property is zoned R3 and is within the Corner Architectural Control District. The house was built between 1910 and 1920 and has a variety of fraternities and sororities that have filtered through it, but at this point is home to, I believe it's pronounced Chi Psi, I hope I said that right, fraternity. So this one's a little bit tricky, but there's an existing special use permit granted in 1985, and it actually covers both 167 Chancellor and 165, and it was for the use of sorority, which coincides with fraternity. And the resolution is attached to a report, as well as some of the minutes taken from that council meeting that goes into a little bit more detail of what the council discussed at that time. But really, the main points are the special use permit limits the residents to 33, covering both properties. And then it allowed for the building itself to encroach on the Madison front setback. So right now, the applicant is seeking to amend the existing special use permit, and they would not be asking to increase the resident limitation. All they're asking to do is add the addition that would encroach into the Madison Lane frontage even farther than what is allowed now, and then encroach into the Chancellor Street setback. In your report, I've included a little picture of what the corner lots, how we interpret the side setbacks there because it's a little bit confusing. At this point in time, I don't have the exact numbers of how far they want to encroach. Just I note that they're going to, the proposed addition will do that. So at the point that they actually apply for the special use permit, they would have to list how much they want to encroach there. Some of what they're proposing in addition to the addition they're asking for is pedestrian improvements that include a 6-foot sidewalk along Madison Lane where currently there is no sidewalk, and then enhanced landscaping including street trees and pedestrian scale lights. In addition to asking for a special use permit, they are required to get BAR approval. Included in your report is the action taken. This actually went before BAR April 17th, where it's my understanding they approved the general massing, but they understood that this would come back to them because the special use permit has to go forward. So any concerns you all might have in relation to that would be something you would want to note tonight. I don't think I have anything else. I've attached a few code sections, one of which is the special use permit factors you all are supposed to address. So one of the questions I have at the end, if you want to use it to help your discussion, is just initial concerns with massing and scale. Is the project harmonious with the surrounding area? And then does the use conform to the land use map and future vision for this area? And if you have any questions or the applicant has a presentation.
Why would, I'm just confused, why would a setback encroachment require an SUP amendment rather than going to the BZA?
Because they, as part of a special use permit, you can modify the setbacks, and part of that was already included in the resolution. And so that section, I think it's 34-162, but it's included in your packet.
And it's not a hardship.
So they
It
would
wouldn't be a hardship yet, right?
So
Because we don't usually see an SUP for
Yeah, so
a
it's
setback.
it's an amendment, but it follows
Okay.
the same process, so it's kind of tricky. But really, what would happen, let's say you approve it, it would be the same resolution, just noting, here's the updated version, here are the new setbacks. Setback on Chancellor, for example, would be 10 feet instead of the 20 that is required now.
Okay.
Any more questions? Would you like to hear the applicants? Okay. Do you have anything else?
Waiting for this to turn on.
Oh.
So the only thing the BAR approved was the massing,
That's,
basically.
I believe so. It's what's in here, is that correct? The general massing. The action says, BAR approves the application for general massing, concept, and composition with details and the SUP recommendation to come back. They found the proposed addition will increase the building's massing and add an additional porch and portico, satisfy the BR's criteria, and are compatible with this property and other properties in the corner district. And that was taken April 17th.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I might have to go grab our guy because I don't know why this is not turning on.
It's tired.
It's tired. We're all tired. I'm gonna go see if he's in
I
his.
think Missy just walked.
Oh, okay. There it goes.
Good evening. I'm Kevin Schaefer. I'm the project manager with Design Develop. I have with me Bob Pinio. He's the principal of Design Develop. I'm not as well spoken as Mr. David Timmerman, so I have to read off a sheet list. I apologize. If you fall asleep, I won't be offended. I know it's late in the evening. So, built between 1910 and 1920, 167 Chancellor Street resides in the Corner Architecture Control District and was originally constructed for the Alpha Chi Rho fraternity. More recently, the house was owned by the Alpha Phi sorority in the 1980s, the Phi Delta Theta fraternity in the early 2000s, and currently is the home of the Chi Psi fraternity. It has previously been used as a commercial kitchen for a catering company. It's been used as a student boarding house, and it's been used by various fraternities and sororities. Unusually, and as city staff has mentioned, there is an existing SUP already in place that was established in 1985 that ties the parcels of 167 and 165 together. This existing special use permit was applied for by the Alpha Phi sorority and covers 3 topics. 1, it allows for the variances in the setbacks along Madison Lane. It allows for the fraternity sorority use in an R3 district, and it allows for a combined density of 33 residents over the 2 adjoining lots. To be clear, our intention is for the existing SUP to remain in place with its allowable density of 33 residents on both lots and its allowable use as a fraternity or sorority, as it will continue to be used by the Chi Psi fraternity. The only clarification for this SUP amendment is that the proposed project encroaches slightly further into the Madison Lane setback, but also now into the Chancellor Street setback as well. The goal of this presentation will be twofold. The first is to show that the additional variances and setbacks will not have a significant adverse impact on the surrounding area and will be in keeping with the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. The second goal will be to show that the proposed project improves existing conditions through the renovation of a tired structure, through increased pedestrian connectivity and site lighting, and through increased landscaping. So the site at 167 Chancellor Street is challenging. It's located at the intersection of Madison Lane and Chancellor Street. The converging streets form a triangular shaped lot that presents significant challenges to the development of the lot. Given the current setback requirements, which are approximately 36 feet in the front, 20 feet in the rear, and 10 foot on the side. In November of 2017, we presented a preliminary design to the BAR that attempted to minimize any additional increase to the footprint of the building by incorporating required programmatic space to a 3rd floor addition. This scheme was met with reservations by the majority of the BAR members, as this required large dormers and a 3-story stair tower. A strong recommendation was made to preserve the original massing of the protected Chancellor Street facade while expanding the required footprint towards Madison Lane and expanding the footprint of the 1980s addition. Simultaneously, there is an inherent opportunity and responsibility at the confluence of these 2 important streets to captivate and engage both the vehicular and pedestrian traffic. As a popular thoroughfare, pedestrians filter from over Beta Bridge, down Chancellor Street, and onto Madison Lane en route to the university. Currently, this intersection is challenging. Overgrown landscaping, undefined property edges, and disorganized parking combine with a lack of sidewalks to create a confusing and undesirable pedestrian route. We formally submitted to BAR in mid-April of this year with a revised design that kept intact the defining historic characteristics, an addition that was clearly separated from the original historic structure. Gaining unanimous approval for concept and massing, the BAR commended the approach that allowed for a clear distinction between the old and the new. A new facade is proposed along Madison Lane as well to afford a contextual and appropriate street presence that more closely relates to the feel of other fraternities along this row. In this slide, the footprint of the proposed addition is highlighted in blue, while the red represents the historic structure to remain. It was of paramount importance to us to preserve and harmonize with the context around us. Taking a step back to look at the precinct, Madison Lane is a unique street that has evolved over time to address the specific conditions found along Mad Bull. A pedestrian traveling from the university towards Beta Bridge on Madison Lane experiences an impactful release and compression that is directly related to the public realm at Madison Bowl. At this public arena, the front yards are much larger and grander. Consequently, at the termination of Madison Bowl, the streets compresses into a tight, clustered arrangement of houses with much smaller setbacks. The contrast in these 2 street wall conditions increases our Madison Lane setback calculation when we measure 500 feet from our lot. Additionally, the fraternities along Madison Lane embody a building typology that blends the institutional scale of the university with the adjacent residential neighborhoods. Designed for 12 to 16 residents, these historic fraternal houses are grander in scale and mass and feature neoclassical building elements such as 2-story porticos and heavy pediments that help successfully transition the 2 uses, institutional to residential. These larger houses are seen throughout the precinct with sizes that range from 5,500 square feet to upwards of 7,000 square feet. The proposed work would afford a house that is more in keeping with the scale of adjacent structures. However, the tight building lot with such large setbacks and the ability to go up with a third story makes a challenging building that is the same size, scale, and mass of adjacent structures exceptionally challenging. Further diving into this idea of the compression and release, this slide shows the view of the existing area of compression along Madison Lane, which happens down at the intersection of Madison Lane and Chancellor. The perceived street wall is tight and dense with both building stock and surface parking. Contrastingly, this view shows the area of release around Madison Bowl. And you can see the front yards here are much larger with landscape courtyards and planting. These views from the pedestrian perspective highlight the two contrasting conditions. On the top, we have the release at the Madison Bowl and the larger front yards that are planted and have courtyards. And then in the bottom, it's the tight street wall condition with the houses more clustered and tightly arranged along the street. The requested setback variance for Madison Lane would not significantly adverse the street wall condition, rather it would serve to reinforce the established development pattern of this section. Furthermore, the pedestrian connectivity breaks down along 167 Chancellor Street as sidewalks terminate on both sides of the street. The pedestrian is forced into the road on Madison Lane, which is often challenging and dangerous due to the on-street parking that you see in this image. On the Chancellor Street side, overgrown landscaping and steep existing stairs present a challenge to pedestrians. Further down the road in front of 163 Chancellor, along here, the concrete sidewalk disappears altogether, deteriorating into a gravel path. There is, however, a new 6-foot sidewalk on the other side of Chancellor, here. Connecting pedestrians to this wider, safer sidewalk will be paramount to providing a safe pedestrian route towards Rugby Road. So our proposed site plan features many improvements that will positively impact the neighborhood and the precinct. Through an extension and widening of the existing sidewalk along Madison Lane is proposed to the intersection with Chancellor Street. Through further study and with coordination with city engineers, the Chi Psi fraternity has also offered to facilitate a crosswalk at that location. On Chancellor, the proposed plan improves the connectivity to the existing sidewalk on the east side of the street by providing a wider, less steep stair than currently exists. Additionally, there are 8 total pedestrian pole lights that improve site lighting and safety for pedestrians. Thoughtful planting beds and new street trees provide enhanced landscaping, while the removal of overgrown and scrubby landscaping further improves the pedestrian experience. Going back to the site setback variances along Chancellor Street for a moment, it's worth noting that the property line on our Chancellor Street side is anywhere from 8'6" to 9'4" from back of curb, taking out a sizable portion of our perceived building lot. So in this existing image of the Chancellor Street facade, you see the historic characteristics that have been identified by the city and the BAR that are to be retained. These defining characteristics of the original house include the 3-bay asymmetrical front, the intersecting hipped roof with hipped roof dormers, and the 1-story porch with angled sides and Roman Doric columns. The proposed addition retains the original facade entirely on the Chancellor Street, while removing the marginal 1980s addition and replacing it with an addition that is complementary in massing and fenestration. A recess at the line of the addition distinguishes the old from the new, but hipped roofs and a new dormer in keeping with the dormers on the original structure allow the project to be legible and cohesive. On Madison Lane, the existing conditions highlight a facade that retains little, if any, of the charming characteristics found on the Chancellor Street side. Here, the enclosed porch and marginal 1980s addition detract from the original historic structure. Furthermore, the uneven spacing of windows, the lack of rational building organization, and the diminished scale and massing of the historic structure seem out of place when examining the rest of the buildings along Madison Lane. The proposed addition and renovation creates a facade that helps activate the street by creating a 2-story front porch that addresses the pedestrian. The renovated building features neoclassical building elements and a rational, balanced fenestration organization that is more in keeping with the look and feel of Madison Lane. It's important to reiterate the priority of BAR was to have the original historic characteristics remain intact, but it is equally imperative to note that BAR was empathetically in favor of harmonizing the new and reconfigured elements of the building with the precinct in which it resides. Given this, we sought to improve the parcel for the precinct as much as possible to mitigate any associated adverse impacts of the setback encroachment, while remaining in keeping with the zoning ordinance purpose and intent. Due to the lot configuration and large setbacks, even the historic structure would not be permissible today. In light of this, the proposed addition aims to complement and strengthen the defining historic characteristics of the existing structure. I just want to briefly touch on the side porch that we've introduced. The side porch then has the opportunity to act as a synthesizer between the residential scale and massing of Chancellor Street and the classical order and massing of Madison Lane. We've taken this opportunity to create a two-story uncovered porch that uses the same style columns, railing, and trim details to visually connect the articulation of the porch on Chancellor Street to that of Madison Lane. Concurrently, the porch helps address the vehicular intersection and serves as a visual gateway for the flow of pedestrians from Rugby Road and Beta Bridge towards the university in the corner. The proposed addition will be clad in materials that create a cohesive final project. Brick and mortar that is close to what is found on the existing structure, complemented by whitewood trim. BAR suggested a precast or stone plinth and synthetic slate or metal roofing to round out the material choices. Street trees and street lighting will be organized and rhythmic to complement the Madison Lane facade, and the neoclassical building elements like the two-story portico and the raised front porch reinforce the feeling on Madison Lane of the rest of the adjacent structures on Madison Lane and improve the look of the existing house. As we come around the corner, a recess at the existing facade helps distinguish the old from the new. We've incorporated some new openings here at the ground level to help the interior layout take advantage of this new exterior space. We wanted to thank city staff for helping us through this project. It's a little bit confusing with the existing SUP and the amendment to it. As was mentioned before, this preliminary discussion, so we're happy to answer any questions and excited to engage in some discussion with you about this. Thanks.
All right, thank you for giving us a chance to look at it at this very preliminary phase of the project. Can you talk more about the decision to turn the house around to make the primary entrance, or what appears to be the primary entrance, now on Madison Street, rather than the historic front of the house on Chancellor Street, and to change the modest Queen Anne style house into a classical revival building on this side?
Sure. When we look at the BAR guidelines and we examine the goals of BAR, the two things that jump out are to preserve and to harmonize with the adjacent context. Preserve in this case is to retain the identifying historic characteristics, and those historic characteristics are found primarily on Chancellor Street. So the Chancellor Street front entrance remains as is with the front porch. Chancellor Street is much more residential in scale. It's got a single-story porch, and you see that along Chancellor Street. Chancellor Street is a lot more like the typical Charlottesville residential streets that you'd see, maybe a Park Street, Altamont, Locust, or Lexington. In these streets, front entrances are noted typically with a single-story porch. There's usually a bump out or some sort of element that breaks down the scale of the building overall. And then they use dormers and residential detailing to sort of round out this very residential feel. When this building was built originally, Chancellor Street was the primary street, and this building faced that way, and the front entrance had those characteristics of the residential. In an effort to start to harmonize with our adjacent context on Madison Lane, the goal there is to begin to introduce some of these neoclassical building elements that we see within this fraternity typology. And the fraternity typology that happens on Madison Lane is expressed through a larger building. Typically, these buildings were required to house 12 to 16 residents. They were a blending of the institutional and residential scales, and there is a desire to have an entrance on Madison Lane as well. And so when we introduce an entrance onto Madison Lane, which there is precedence on this road, many of the lots on this street have both entrances on Chancellor and on Madison Lane. We begin to take our cues from the adjacent context once we introduce that entrance. Yes. This is our BAR submission. St. Anthony's Hall is an excellent case study for this precinct. What happened was originally St. Anthony's Hall was built to face Chancellor Street, and it was one of the first fraternities on the street. As Madison Lane developed, and Madison Lane became more of the row of the fraternities and the institutional scale, the elevation of St. Anthony's Hall flipped so that they could address Madison Lane more appropriately. Similarly, what's happening here is that our the scale of our building is increasing to more appropriately fit within the adjacent context, and we're opening up an entrance onto Madison Lane. We're using these building elements to do so.
St. Anthony's, the context for that is the athletic field, as you pointed out before, that release area of Madison, where you have a field, you're seeing it from essentially rugby.
It is, and I mean, St. Anthony's is perfectly symmetrical. It was a neoclassical building when it started, and now it's got two big neoclassical porticos. This was a Queen Anne house with a porch facing Chancellor Street, and this was the back of the house. So I think your analysis about compression and things fails to recognize that the two houses at the end, 165 and 167, in fact, face Chancellor Street. I mean, the reason that they're where they are is because this is the backyard of these houses. All the other houses on Madison Lane face Madison Lane. So, and they have their backyards to the degree that they still do. I mean, St. Anthony's and the two houses on either side of it are unique in that they're through block lots on a deep, deep lot. So it's, I mean, and basically a good portion of this addition is the fraternity's party room. Right, that's what those three doors are. This is the big party room going on to their patio.
That's actually
it's allegedly the dining room.
That's our dining room.
I mean, every fraternity in the last 5 years has come to the BAR or to some other regulatory agency and has said, we need a party room. And we're going to put it underground so it won't be quite so noisy when we're on Preston near people. And this is just a version of that that's basically demolishing what's left of the south elevation of this house, because all three of those doors are in the original part of the house. So you've demolished the west elevation and the north elevation, and basically what's left of this house in the end is the east elevation. So I'm not sure that your analysis of trying to fit this in to this pattern of development of this neighborhood as a variation of the setbacks is really convincing. I walk past this site several times a week. It was there this afternoon. And I don't think that your discussion of the compression and the release is really reflects my experience of walking on that side of the street. I also find it interesting you're proposing a 6-foot sidewalk when I think the sidewalk on that side of Madison Lane is 3 feet, 4 feet. I mean, is your sidewalk going to match up with the rest of the Heather? Okay. Sure.
So that was actually staff putting in their 2
Okay.
cents with streets that work, and the idea
Right.
is, this is actually just a local street, but we always say if you could provide wider sidewalks, that's great. I think they're pushing onto their property because Madison is such a narrow right-of-way. So, you know,
Yeah, I only raise it because, it's just way wider than anything
Right.
else nearby.
Right.
And so there's no hope of it getting wider on the other side, at the other end of Madison Lane, because there are retaining walls
Mhm.
and big hedges. And, I mean, it's just, it's a nice idea, but I'm
Mhm.
not sure that it's really contextual in this corner of the street.
well, standard is just 5, so they could always
Okay.
go down to 5.
So, I also, I think the streetlights are nice. I think they have a half-life of 6 months. It's just pedestrian lights in this context. Again, nice idea, but as far as long-term benefit as part of a zoning reconsideration, it just, they're just not going to live. I mean, they're.
Is that because of the fraternity activity, or?
I'm not accusing this fraternity. I'm just
Well,
accusing the community of.
But it's because of a very active street sweep.
I have walked. It is,
Well-
yes. I have walked
Very active
Madison Lane
street.
on a Sunday morning, and there are no front yards. There are collections of Natty Light cans crushed. You can barely see grass. It's a busy place, and so just there may be another way to light the site that will actually have a more permanent effect. But I'm just not convinced that this amount of enlargement is really justified by the context in which it's proposed.
So today, we're going to ask, we have some questions and topics for discussion. And I guess let's just go down the list so we can get some things answered. Upon initial review, do any of the planning commissioners foresee adverse impacts related to but not limited to massing and scale of project? I would assume that maybe that's a yes, from what I've heard.
Well, I think my comments were more related to massing and scale
Okay.
than not massing and scale.
Okay.
I think it's fair to say that corner condition, and I'm not the expert on historic context as Mr. Hogg is, so I'll say that up front. But on a corner condition, heavily traveled, that basically is a building with 2 fronts, it's going to require a fairly unique architectural solution. And I think, notwithstanding all the details that were mentioned before, the massing to me has the ability to be appropriate because of it. We're not talking about an increase in height, as far as I know. We're following original ridge lines, and as a special use permit, I'm kind of thinking of the impacts of the loss of the setbacks, and I think the improvements to the space between the building and the public way, given the walking areas and some amount of lighting, however indestructible it might need to be in the future, are improvements to kind of make that space, more animated and better. So I'll probably be in the minority of people who want to talk about massing and scale, but I've read the BAR comments and they seem to be generally on board with it, 6-0 or something like that, realizing there's a ton of details that have to be worked out. But my first impression was that it was a relatively creative way of solving a program need on an odd site that had multiple sides, and I felt like it would kind of transition around because no one piece of it seemed to overwhelm me, but I'm in the minority, I guess.
No, well, we cancel each other out.
Yeah, well,
Neither of us can vote on it, so it doesn't really, matter.
That's true.
Unfortunately, talk about this all night.
Yeah, I don't even know I'm talking, but anyway. go ahead.
Oh, he won't be here.
He won't be
Yeah,
here.
that's right.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's true. But anyway. You know, we're always talking about impacts and how to mitigate, right? And so the details will be scrutinized by the BAR, but the impact of the loss of setback, because it's not a use impact. It's a loss of setback, which translates to massing. How is that space between the street and the building kind of used?
Am I allowed to jump in here? Is this okay, or is?
sure. It's a discussion.
Right, that's.
This is the perfect opportunity
It's
to
one
do
of the
that.
few times we can do
That's
the
right.
give
Okay,
and
good.
take. It's a
That's what's fun
discussion.
about these.
I think it's just important for us to note that with the removal of the 1980s addition, the actual building footprint is only proposed to expand by 560 feet. We're putting a large amount of programmatic space in the basement, but that's not necessarily affecting the above-ground building footprint, and so it's really an additional 9 or 10% of used lot area when we're talking about these kind of the setback modifications or setback variance requests. And in sort of this scale and massing thing, it's something that we've grappled with and talked about internally a lot, and debated with our client who's like, hey, we need a certain amount of programmatic space to make a fraternity work. We've got to get 12 guys in here, and we're like, yes, but we've got a historic property, and we've got to make this work through BAR and then through SUP. And so we did this precinct study that told us that the average square footage of the houses in this area is something like 5,400 square feet, based on the GIS listed square footage, and the one we're proposing is 5,500 square feet all in. So we felt like we were within that realm of the appropriate houses along Madison Lane.
So the question that's going to come before us is the approval of the SUP, which would be to grant a more non-conforming setback, correct?
Sounds like it.
Oh, yeah, they want to maintain the fraternity sorority allowance that they currently have in place, the setback, and then there's a third thing that's left my
The
brain.
third thing, I think, was the use, fraternity and sorority that will.
That's
Just a setback.
So it's
So-
a setback in the use.
Right, but that's what I'm saying, so
2 setbacks.
more legal, more non-conforming.
So if they didn't have an SUP to provide the sorority, for the sorority fraternity
Then
use.
they couldn't request a setback change. So you can, if you have a SUP, one of the things that can be considered is a change in the setbacks.
But
If if that wasn't a consideration, they couldn't request just a
If
setback.
this was still a single-family house or boarding house that was grandfathered or something, we wouldn't be looking at this. It's
No, it
only
has
because
to be a
they have the
use.
SUP.
Yeah.
Because they have the SUP, they can request to vary from the normal setback.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We just don't get things like this very often.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, and
An
actually,
SUP
We
just
get-
for the,
Well, no, we
Yeah.
get fraternities in here all the
we
time.
get that. We
promise.
get SUPs for fraternities, but not for,
Well,
not
and
for
in
just the
most
encroachment.
cases, those are asking for setback changes as
Right,
well.
but they're asking
It's
for
just
more
they're-
density or
They're
something.
asking, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas this, they're,
This is just a
want to
setback.
maintain that aspect.
So technically, the scale and massing of the building is, I think that a good argument can be made that this is appropriate. It's a very difficult site. It's a strange site. My objections to it comes from being a historic preservation architect and knowing that this violates most every one of the Secretary's standards of rehabilitation. Taking away, I mean, it's a facade-ectomy, and then you're using it for the back of the house, not the facade anymore.
That's an innovative facadectomy. I love it.
But as a planning commissioner, looking at what we're supposed to use to evaluate this, yeah, I guess it is appropriate for the scale and the massing of the buildings and the context around it.
Now, that's for EC corridor or review or no?
No.
No.
Are you talking about for special use permits?
Special use.
That's all we're looking at.
Yeah,
And if
because
they're not increasing the number of residents, and they're not asking for an increase in parking, they may be asking for an increase in partying space. I don't know how that figures into adverse
Fantastic.
impacts. But, yeah, I mean, it seems like a creed, and far from it, both, Jody and Brian are and even, Kurt over here, you guys know a whole lot more about it. I thought it looked nice. I thought the changes to it actually enhanced the whole building.
You can see yourself on that second deck, right?
Yes,
With
of
that-
course, right.
See,
With the national bow or
And
something.
with the setbacks, given like you said, that there are no sidewalks going around there and all, it's
That
kind of
begs the
like,
question, though, why isn't there a sidewalk continuing on the Chancellor Street to the corner?
it looks like the topo, go ahead, sorry.
It just didn't happen.
Kurt's
I have to
right.
cross the street there.
Yeah.
The sidewalk is 3.5 feet above street level.
Yeah.
And you'd be retaining for most of the length of it if you had it at road level. It would
But
be-
it's still, if it ended up at where we're taking the Madison Street sidewalk to, it would be down a street level again, right?
It would have a lot of slope to make that transition to go down.
And there would be retaining all along this bank here.
Yeah.
Basically, you can see where it starts to die back in right around here at the corner. Given the new the new 6 foot wide sidewalk on the opposite side of Chancellor, part of the 1985 SUP was to incorporate these stairs so that you could cross the street safely at that location. I think the client's Kaisai's efforts are to continue to improve that safety and that connectivity, and it would involve taking these stairs, and this is shown on the site plan, but where the grade is a little less steep, making that connection up here with a wider set of less steep stairs that gets you over to that side of Chancellor Street, further away from the corner as
Yeah,
well.
honestly, and I apologize to you for this, there's nowhere you want to go on the west side of Chancellor Street. It just takes you to St. Paul's. Where you want to go is on the east side of Chancellor Street and down the rest of the corner. And even the crosswalk to get to UVA is on that east side of
On the
Chancellor
bridge side over
Street.
there, yeah.
So there's no reason for a sidewalk at that part of the west side of Chancellor Street.
But coming down Madison, it looks like there is a
Oh,
need.
definitely,
Yeah, that seemed
yeah.
like an improvement.
Yeah,
And if you could just take the cars off Madison,
that would help a lot.
that would help a lot.
I do think it's relatively, we were looking at that image where you were showing Kevin the sidewalk, I just kind of noticed it.
Let me see if I can get back to that one.
Yeah, on the bottom left there.
Mhm.
It is interesting, and I don't know if it came up in your conversation with BAR before, but I'm reading that there's a wall around the patio in the front,
Yeah.
and so the kind of bunkering, I know it's probably a safety thing for people to gather, but it would have it's not really massing, but it does change that yard feel. It moves it away from, that looks like a yard to a house. And the walls, I imagine, would make it more difficult to see that 3-bay, the angled.
Wait, yeah.
So, I don't know.
Definitely, it's a good point.
bright minds in the future can ponder that one, but,
The seawall came from this drop-in grade that happens basically right here. We go from 549 to 546, and so a seawall kind of naturally forms.
okay, so it's a seat wall, it's not a, okay.
But, yeah, your point is well taken. It's partly for, containment of that area and then seat wall. But we're anticipating a 2-foot seat wall there.
Okay, this image, wherever that is.
Right.
Has the wall closer to the thing, taller, for some reason.
Right, okay, yeah.
I mean, I would, and this is outside our purview, and I apologize. I do think you want to look at how that wall meets the porch. It's not very pretty.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just
And
lower.
the boys do use that porch. They were dancing on it this afternoon around.
Goodness, you did that. I think we could put a restraining order on. That area, I'm thinking of the one that's on, did you mention Preston? That
Yeah,
kind of went down in a hole
Yeah.
to get into there. This would be the opposite effect because it would be
Sigma
over your
Chi.
head. Yeah, I don't know the
no,
name.
there are two. There's Theta Chi and then there's Sigma Chi, right? And it's the one on Preston, not the one. It's
Okay.
one house in.
Just out of curiosity, this is an old fraternity from like whatever,
Yeah.
and now they're just returning. Why? Where were they? Why'd they go away from UVA?
That I couldn't answer.
It-
I'm not a.
It's all about optimizing location, and being on Madison Lane is ideal. Right
It
across
says
the
the fraternity was gone though. It left UVA and now it's back. I just didn't know.
they can lose their charter for a lot of reasons.
Ah,
Lack of interest or action.
Got
And,
it.
And the houses on Chancellor Street are where a lot of the fraternities land when they're reestablishing themselves. But this one with its Madison Lane address is prime real estate, which is why they want the big portico facing Madison Lane and why they're turning the house around, because it makes them look like they belong like everybody else does. It's all about that. It's not anything else. It's,
It would be interesting, in one of the views that you've got showing the
I'm gonna
compression
recuse
and whatever,
myself on this one.
there's another portico building across the way on the left. It'd be interesting to see these two in their context together, to see how that works together. Do you have that?
It is an interesting kind of
That
case
process.
study counterpoint from our house. This is the Delta Epsilon house that was built in 2009.
yeah,
9, it went through BAR.
it did.
Um,
And you all can do a lot better with your order than they did.
Kind of-
Because your SketchUp is not looking real nice, but I think when you start to really detail that porch and the balcony and way that portico meets the cornice, it's gonna need a lot of attention. Because that is kind of a dud.
Y'all, do you think you have everything you need from us? Does everybody feel as if they've been heard on this one? Thank you. Do you need any more questions from us?
I think we, maybe just Bob Pinio, Design Develop. We've heard kind of tangential and specific considerations. And maybe it's not fair to ask a little, straw poll that would say, hey, when we did this with BAR, the first one, we've got a consensus. This is the wrong direction. We need another direction. That was kind of a clearer picture. We have a lot of masters to feed here, and that's the client, BAR, planning board. So the clearer this, so that we're not wasting your time, the client's time. I think that we're optimistic, so we're hearing optimistic things.
Well, there's only two that's going to vote that's sitting right here. I'm going to
Agreed.
abstain. I'm not going to vote on this, but there'll only be two, and these two won't be here.
Right.
So,
You're going to recuse?
I am.
You, oh, okay,
I
wow.
am.
Why?
personal reason.
So I guess, so the next time we meet, there'll be a fuller board.
Right, we'll have to do
Yeah.
this again.
It's unfortunate for
It
you
is.
Yeah.
because
Bad timing.
we have people going off and new people coming on, and there's an
Right.
absence, so
Yeah.
we
They could
can't
be
tell you
watching.
how those
Yeah.
people will react.
But if you
to
convince
this.
those two down there, I'm sure they can sway a few votes.
I have to agree with Jody. I'm also out of the preservation world, and it violates almost every standard that, and the way I teach preservation theory or practice, I would never recommend any of this, but the way I see my role, I don't want to step on the toes of the BAR, and the design is their purview, and we deal with the setback.
But it is an entrance corridor review too.
No, no, no,
right?
no, it's not.
Straight
No,
up
no, it's
BAR.
not. No, so, I mean, I feel better that maybe the BAR told you were going in the wrong direction, because I have to agree with Brian and Jody about changing the
clarify.
orientation of the building and all of those things.
Just to clarify, they told us that the first time, they unanimously agreed and gave us full
Okay.
consent for what we're
Okay,
doing.
so I
For
I
massing.
just don't feel
For
like,
massing, articulation, the basic idea, we got down to, should there be a jack course, a header, as a jack header, we got down to specifics. But by and large, we left that with a very positive response, unanimous response, that next time you meet, we'd like to see material samples. It was much more of a foregone conclusion. Don't want to speak for them. It was about articulation and, surveying the windows and, but much more the massing, the concept, what drove the concept, that there was a unanimous agreement that we were on the right track.
That surprises me, but, about the BAR,
Yeah.
not Bill. But if my role here on this dais is limited to what I see in the staff report for topics for discussion, the things that bother me about it probably are not part of my evaluation. Shouldn't be part of the evaluation.
that's
So
right.
this might be a course question. Could we count on based on your purview and the things that you can say yes to? Would you say yes to this submission?
I don't know how my opinion would matter to you at all right now. It's just one.
Oh, I'm just,
I'd rather not say.
okay.
I think I'd rather us stick to the facts instead of lobbying for votes right now, because I think what we need to do is address how it affects in the zoning world. And this is not really a lobby situation.
Just trying to get.
I understand,
Sure.
but again, we've got 2 and 4 that's gonna be here different, totally different at the next meeting,
Okay,
whenever you come forward.
okay.
That had, well, 1 new, but she's not here to hear it, and then 3 other commissioners brand new. So,
Great.
but as it relates to zoning, and should we approve an SUP to reduce the setbacks even further? And from what I understand, almost close to the property line on one side, right? Within a
And I'm
foot.
not necessarily convinced that there is merit in doing that. Just based on the setback
Right.
and safety considerations and
Right.
other things.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks.
Yes.
okay, we have one last item on this agenda.
There's no one here.
They've all gone?
Well, there won't be a
Yeah.
lot of argument. threw away my agenda. The last item on the agenda is for a zoning text amendment. It says mixed use in the downtown extended. And I think we have a presentation by our county attorney, our city attorney.
Whoa.
Sorry. It's somebody else.
Where do you spend your
Attorney.
days?
Yeah, right.
Yes. So, some time ago, I believe it was in the fall of 2016 now, we went through months of review of some issues that I pointed out as being problematic within our existing zoning ordinance. So we called that by various terms, whether it was a legal audit or a code review or whatever it was. At the end of that process, you all adopted a resolution that identified a list of items that were among those that should receive some priority of action. And on that list was a notation or a recognition that in some of your mixed-use zoning districts, there are height increases or density increases that one is permitted within a mixed-use building or a mixed-use development that one could not otherwise obtain for other types of developments. So, for example, in your downtown extended district, a mixed-use building can be 9 stories tall, but a non-mixed-use building cannot be more than 5 stories tall. In some of your zoning districts, those benefits can be obtained with very minimal effort to actually achieve a bona fide mixture of uses within a building or development. There are a handful of districts in which height or density increases have to be approved administratively when someone comes in with even the most minor effort at a mixture of uses. So that could be, for example, one apartment within what's otherwise a 9-story office building. And so one of the recommendations was that until the comp plan process can be completed and the city can undertake a comprehensive review of its existing approach to implementing mixed-use development, that there perhaps should be some consideration to plugging some of these holes in the interim. So after you adopted that resolution, rather than sort of march forward directly, the Place Design Task Force and Mike Stoneking in particular led an effort to have a series of meetings at which Place members and members of the development community met on several occasions to brainstorm whether or not there was a better proposal than coming up with sort of a minimum percentage that would be in the ordinance. After a number of months of that effort, at which no broad consensus for an alternative could be reached, Place on March 9th, 2018, met and discussed a proposal that essentially was the same recommendation that I had made to you back in the fall of 2016, which is, as an interim measure, we should adopt a zoning text amendment that specifies that if there's no other percentage specified within a particular zoning district, no other minimum percentage specified, that if you can get a height or density benefit for constructing a mixed-use building or development, that the minimum percentage of a particular use should be 12.5%. So it doesn't, we're not prescribing which use it has to be, but the definition of mixed use is a combination of residential and non-residential uses. So you can choose which you want to predominate, but the minimum percentage that has to be represented in a mixed-use building or development would be 12.5%. In a lot of your districts, 25% was originally the percentage specified, but there is one district, and that's the Cherry Avenue district, in which 12.5% was used. And the members of place seem to favor going with the lower percentage rather than the higher one, because they felt that the original higher percentages weren't favorable, weren't well thought out, and one of the reasons that those higher percentages were taken out originally is that they were too constraining. And they thought that as a stopgap measure, the use of the lowest percentage that they found within any of the mixed-use zoning districts was the preferable interim measure until a better, more comprehensive approach can be developed to implement an updated land use plan. And so what's referred to in Place's March 9th, 2018 correspondence as Proposal 1 is their recommendation for implementing a minimum standard of 12.5% as being the sort of quantum of presence for a use, any particular use in a mixed-use building. And so I would encourage you to initiate that as a proposed zoning text amendment, to go through a public hearing process and make a final decision as to whether or not you want to go ahead and implement that in the near future.
So the table we got has a lot of highlighted area on it. So is this zoning text amendment just for downtown extended or also for corner?
No, what Place endorsed was a provision that would be placed sort of up front in the mixed use article, that's sort of a catch-all provision. So it says, in any location where there is a specified benefit to providing a mixed-use building or development, but there's no definition of mixed use that goes with that, then you will use this sort of catch-all, this minimum percentage, to determine what the mixture has to be in that building or development. In most of the districts, you already have a definition or a percentage, but I believe downtown extended is the only one where you get such a significant height bonus for a mixed-use building or development, but there are a couple of other places where you get a density bonus within a mixed-use development without there being a definition of what that means.
Has anybody looked to see if this is working? Like, is the 12.5% working on Cherry Avenue? I know that
we have any examples.
Right. I know that we looked at some things, and
What it would eliminate is these odd uses where there is just one leasing office or one small efficiency apartment in an office building, which then allows them to exercise the height or density
I
with an
agree.
incidental use.
And is it the 12% of just the ground floor or 12% of the entire area? How's it?
12% of the whole, 12% of the
whole
of the gross floor area of the building or development.
And is there anything on here that talks about where it would be in the building? So, for instance, on downtown, we would want to see that on the ground level.
Well, most of your districts already have provisions that specify ground floor commercial uses, or specify no residential on the ground floor, or specify that residential can't be on the primary street frontage. So I think the placement of your uses is reasonably provided for within your mixed-use districts, in the places where you wanted to control that.
So if we went with the 12.5%, this third bullet point here, though, seems to indicate that it could be different if different percentages are specified within the division containing the regulations for the applicable mixed-use zoning district. Would it be doing away with it?
That's the lowest number. The 12.5 is the lowest number. Others have 25%, and that's just saying it would, if it's not specified, this would be what it is. But it wouldn't change those others.
So if you have 18 different mixed-use zoning districts, we know that one of them doesn't have any definition that would guide what's a fairly significant height bonus. And then there are probably 2 to 4 other districts that don't have a definition that guides when you are allowed a density bonus. And so this, so if there's a zoning district that says to get this added density bonus, you have to have 25% residential or 75% residential, then that percentage would control. This provision would only govern in a situation where there's no definition.
And it wouldn't matter if it's mixed use A or mixed use B.
What you're looking at street topology.
And all we're considering tonight is initiating a ZTA. It still would need to be considered by the commission.
This is just to put something on the
So-
table for a public
You know,
hearing, yeah.
This does not result in an amendment. It just allows us to move beyond where we were. So I was thinking about this on my way to the meeting tonight, and I was somewhat confused about whether we were going to vote to initiate or we were just having another conversation. And it occurred to me that we've spent substantial time over the last 2 years as a commission thinking about these ideas, and that nothing would be gained by just discussing it tonight.
Yeah.
And then having to go through yet another discussion before initiating, when we would have new members who haven't had the benefit of that. And so I'm prepared to make a motion, and then I'd like to make a second motion. And then we can continue to discuss if anyone seconds it. So I move to initiate a zoning text amendment to implement changes to the mixed-use zoning regulations to specify minimum gross floor area requirements that must be satisfied in order for a development to receive additional height or density. This minimum standard is 12.5% of gross floor area and would apply only in zoning districts for which no different percentages are specified. This amendment is Proposal 1, endorsed by Place via March 9th, 2018 correspondence.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to initiate this ZTA. Any further discussion? Then, Ms. Creasy, would you call roll?
Mr. Alejandro?
Aye.
Ms. Keller?
Aye.
Mr. Santowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kiesecker?
I'm going to abstain.
And
I'll
Ms.
explain.
Green?
Aye.
I'm sorry.
The motion passes.
I'll explain later.
Okay.
I think I know. I would like to make another motion to initiate something that we haven't discussed as much, but which has entered into our consideration of several projects, and this is, it was in our packet as Proposal 2 for consideration, companion amendments. And it's something that place members and during those discussions came up, and it was not necessarily endorsed, although I don't know that there was a lot of objection to it, it just wasn't endorsed. And so this is for parking. within mixed use, so I move that within mixed-use buildings, developments, and projects, off-street parking facilities must meet the following requirements along streets designated as framework streets in the streets at work element of the comprehensive plan. 1, within structures containing parking, any floor at street level of a framework street shall be devoted to a permitted use other than parking. Or 2, any parking use at the street level of a framework street shall be concealed from view from the framework street using linear retail, residential, commercial, or office space. 2, entrances to surface parking lots and structured parking shall not be located along the framework street, but shall be located along non-framework streets or alleys. And 3, surface parking lots must be located behind buildings and screened from the framework street with landscape elements.
Second.
So we have a motion.
Are you reading that from?
I'm reading it from the it's the very last page of our packet.
It's proposal 2 in places March 9th correspondence.
And I think this is something that's been an issue for us in a number of developments, and it would provide some clear guidance until and unless we would move to, at least in some areas, perhaps something that looked more like a form-based code.
And is this for, to initiate?
This would be also
didn't say initiate.
to initiate a zoning, let me amend my motion.
Okay.
That this would be initiation of a ZTA, so there would be a full discussion and a hearing about this.
So we have a motion and a second for the initiation of a zoning text amendment based off of proposal 2 for consideration in our packet. Can I just do that? Y'all understand what we're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Any further discussion? Miss Christie, would you call roll?
Mr. Lahindra?
Aye.
Ms. Keller?
Aye.
Mr. Santosky?
Aye.
Mr. Kiesecker?
Aye.
And Ms. Green?
Aye. That motion also passes. So, not only are we doing all of our other land use, we're gonna have some zoning text amendments, which seems like a lot of fun.
Well, these aren't gonna come June.
Why not?
There's just not enough hours in the day.
So, that is the conclusion, unless you have another motion, Ms. Keller.
Well, I could just stay here and make motions all night. We have John and Kurt.
I know, let's do it.
What else needs to get done?
Kurt could remake his famous eliminate the PUD motion.
That's right.
Yeah, it was
Fine,
about this
let's
time
do
of
it.
night.
He did that as the chair as well.
Yes.
He
Yes.
did that as the chair. That was
Oh,
fantastic.
You talked me off the ledge. Somebody, we should make a motion that they meet second Tuesday of.
Yes, that's good. Oh, I wanted to let you know, the reason I made these ZTAs, when I made up my mind, is when I opened my fortune cookie, it said, whatever you want to do, do it. There are only so many tomorrows.
Nice. That is good.
Well, we need to get those ZTAs in motion so that they happen before August.
Well, let's make a request that we get them in July,
Because Jeannie's,
if we can't do them in June.
That's right.
yeah.
Is that possible? You can say no, but I'm asking. Since
I mean,
it seems to be.
We've talked them to death, we've
We have
thought
talked
about
about
them,
that.
and they're a stopgap measure, and if we don't
Are you ready?
move it forward.
I'm ready for proposal number 1. And I can do the report for that one. It'll be a lot of the same information I put in the legal audit and code review, and we've got places recommendation on that one. And to me, it's kind of a housekeeping item. There's a hole that's not filled with the definition.
Yeah, the second one's a lot meatier.
Proposal 2 is meatier. It seems straightforward, but as Place noted, that there needs to be some further study to determine sort of whether there's any problematic areas that
I can
this,
think of quite
if
a
it
few.
were adopted as a requirement, this couldn't be accomplished. at.
For which framework streets would this not work?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so that's going to require some work by staff that they may not be able to turn around and, for the next meeting.
Sure.
But I can certainly get the other one in here by June if that's acceptable to Missy, if I do the report instead of the staff members.
That's fine. I'm not gonna argue with
I was gonna say, I don't think she's gonna argue with you.
Probably not.
If you do the staff report.
Well, I didn't do the Dan Rosenzweig thing and eulogize John and Kurt. And no one could do it quite as schmoozy as Dan, with all respect to Dan. So I just would like to say that it's been an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to serve with you guys since 2009.
It has been
And
fun.
I look forward to seeing you in other venues, and thank you for.
like Thursday.
Like
Work
Thursday.
session isn't the same thing, so.
It's not.
Thank you so much for all of your commitment and hard work and vision and chairing and vice chairing and all of those things that you've both done so well.
It's been
Thank you.
fun.
You're here.
Thanks.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
You don't think we're gonna just like go away? We're gonna come back to make sure you do this right, you know?
I
We hope
can't
so.
imagine you sitting
You know,
here
we
at
can sit
11
here with
o'clock.
Mr. Emmerich, you know?
We hope so.
We do hope so. Get us back on track.
There's things we need to.
But Kurt, you only have 3 minutes on that side.
Yeah, that's right. It's true.
You better make it concise. You better make those really simple maps.
That's good.
And somebody's gonna have to concede their time to you. Maybe that's John.
But it's unlimited on Cherry Street though. In the neighborhood, when the dogs are walking, I can just
That's
bend
right,
your ear
that's
all I
right.
want.
You could chew my ear all day long.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you as well. You guys have taught me a lot, and I appreciate it.
Cool.
And it's going to be different.
How the PUD.
You'll have to come back and
You
hear
can
how
just
this.
check it out on TV.
I
and
guess I
Jammies.
could do that too.
You want to be the motion man, and I'll second it.
All right, so we make a motion that all these folks over here have to come back on the second Tuesday of June.
I second.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
We're
See you
adjourned.
Thursday. Yes.